This is Rochester, New York, a mid-sized city on the southern shore of Lake Ontario. Cold winters, grey skies, and for most of the 20th century, the undisputed capital of American photography. At its peak, one company employed a third of the entire city. Their yellow boxes were in every home in America. Their name had entered the English language as a synonym for memory itself. Kodak. In 1976, a young engineer at that company walked into a conference room carrying something that looked like a toaster with wires coming out of it. He set it on the table. He took a photograph of the people in the room. He pulled out a cassette tape, slotted it into a playback unit, and a black and white image appeared on a television screen. The executives looked at it, then they looked at him. They didn't ask how it worked. They asked why anyone would ever want to take a picture that way. He had just shown them the future of photography. A camera with no film, no chemicals, no darkroom, no consumables of any kind. Their entire business model depended on consumables. He was told, and these are the words that have been repeated in every account of this story since, "That's cute. Don't tell anyone about it." So he didn't. For 26 years, nobody outside that room knew this had happened. By the time the world found out, Kodak was already dying. But here is the thing that most people don't know. That wasn't the only time this happened. Kodak buried their own invention not once, twice, and the second time, they had no excuse at all. To understand how a company throws away its own future twice, you first have to understand what it had. George Eastman started Kodak in 1888 with a single obsession: make photography simple enough for anyone. Before Eastman, taking a photograph meant heavy equipment, chemical expertise, and a darkroom. He stripped all of that away with roll film and a camera that cost $1. His tagline was, "You press the button, we do the rest." It worked beyond anything he could have imagined. By the early 1990s, Kodak had 2/3 of global film market share, revenue of nearly $16 billion a year, a stock price above $90 per share. The brand ranked among the 5 most valuable on Earth, alongside Coca-Cola and Disney. They employed 145,000 people worldwide. In Rochester alone, they were everywhere: the buildings, the sponsorships, the jobs, the identity of the city itself. But here is the thing about Kodak that most people never understood. Kodak was not a camera company. Cameras were almost beside the point. Kodak was a chemistry company. Film, chemicals, paper, processing. That was where the money was. Every time someone clicked a shutter anywhere in the world, Kodak made money. Every holiday, every birthday, every wedding, you pressed the button. They did the rest, and they charged you for every single step of it. At their peak, roughly 80% of their profits came from that chemistry, from consumables, from the stuff you had to keep buying every time you wanted to take a picture. A camera that needed no consumables at all was not just a competitor, it was a death sentence, and in 1974, they hired the man who would build it. Steve Sasson grew up in Brooklyn. He loved electronics the way some kids love sport, obsessively, instinctively, from a very young age. At 13, he built an amateur radio in his bedroom and accidentally broadcast on a banned frequency. The Federal Communications Commission sent a letter to his house. His father, by his own account, could not understand how his son had managed to get in trouble with the federal government from his bedroom. He studied electrical engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, graduated in 1973, and that same month landed his first job, at Kodak. He later said the most amazing thing about working there was that they paid him to do what he loved. He had no idea yet what that would cost him. In 1974, his supervisor Gareth Lloyd gave him a project: investigate whether a new type of sensor, called a charge-coupled device, could be used to capture an image electronically. No deadline, no team, no real brief. Just a lab, a question, and complete autonomy. Sasson built the camera from whatever he could find: a lens pulled from a discarded Super 8 movie camera sitting in a junk bin, a portable cassette recorder, 16 nickel-cadmium batteries, half a dozen circuit boards wired together on an open steel frame. The whole thing weighed 8 pounds and was roughly the size of a toaster. In December 1975, he took the world's first digital photograph. His subject was a Kodak lab technician named Joy Marshall, who almost certainly had no idea she was about to become the first person ever photographed without film. The image captured in 50 milliseconds. It then took 23 seconds to write to the cassette tape. The result was a 100 by 100 pixel black and white image, grainy, barely recognizable, displayed on a television screen. He called his internal presentation filmless photography. Think about what he called it, filmless photography. He wasn't hiding what this was. He walked into Kodak's conference room with a device called filmless photography and showed it to the people whose entire business model depended on film. His own documented account of that meeting is worth reading carefully. They did not ask how it worked, they asked why anyone would want to take a picture this way when there was nothing wrong with conventional photography. He was told, in words repeated across every account of this story since, "That's cute, don't tell anyone about it." Now, here is the moment that defines everything. When Kodak's marketing team looked at what Sasson had built, their response was not confusion. It was not skepticism about whether the technology could work. They understood exactly what they were looking at. They told him directly, "We could sell this camera. We won't, because it would eat into film sales." They could sell it. They chose not to, because the product their own engineer had just built in their own lab would reduce demand for the consumables their entire profit model depended on. This was not a failure of imagination. This was a decision made by people who saw the future clearly and decided the present was too profitable to risk. The patent was filed in 1977, granted in 1978, and the technology was quietly set aside. Sasson kept working. He spent the next 14 years developing digital photography inside a company that had no intention of selling it. And then, in 1989, he did it again. He and his colleague Robert Hills built the first self-contained digital SLR camera. Not a proof of concept this time. Not a toaster cobbled together from junk bin parts. A proper commercial product with a detachable lens, a 1.3 megapixel sensor, and the ability to store images on a hard drive. It was the size of a regular camera. It worked the way a regular camera worked. It was something a professional photographer could actually pick up and use. Kodak had it in 1989. Canon wouldn't release a comparable commercial digital SLR until 1992. Nikon, not until 1999. If Kodak had gone to market with what Sasson and Hills built, they would not have been catching up to the digital era. They would have defined it. They would have owned it. Kodak looked at it and declined to sell it, to protect film sales. This is the moment that changes the whole story. Because 1975 you can explain. The technology was primitive. The market didn't exist. Personal computers were barely real. The world wasn't ready, and Sasson himself said so. 1989 has no explanation. By 1989, personal computers existed. Consumer electronics were advancing rapidly. The direction of travel was obvious to everyone paying attention. Sasson had built something genuinely ready for market, and the people running Kodak looked at it, understood what it was, and made the exact same choice they had made 14 years earlier. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't short-sightedness. This was a pattern. The same institution, the same logic, the same answer, twice. There was no public disclosure of either invention until 2001, 26 years of silence. While Kodak was protecting its chemistry business, the rest of the world was moving. Sony launched a commercial electronic camera in 1981. Canon, Nikon, and Fujifilm spent the 1980s developing digital products. Then, in the 1990s, it exploded. Kodak did eventually enter the digital camera market. They actually became a significant seller of digital cameras in the early 2000s. But here was the problem they could never solve. The margins on digital were a fraction of the margins on film. No consumables, no roll to replace, no chemicals to process, no prints to develop. Every sale was a one-time transaction with thin profit. The business model that had made Kodak the fifth most valuable brand in America did not exist in the digital world, and no amount of catching up could recreate it. The numbers from this period land like a countdown. 145,000 employees at peak, 47,000 jobs cut between 2003 and 2011, 13 manufacturing plants closed, 130 processing labs shut. Stock price from $90 to 54 cents. Not $54, 54 cents. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Assets of $5.1 billion against debts of $6.8 billion. The New York Stock Exchange suspended trading of its shares. 132 years after George Eastman started the company in Rochester, New York, it was over. And Steve Sasson? In 2009, 3 years before the bankruptcy, President Barack Obama invited him to the East Room of the White House and awarded him the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, the highest honor the US government gives to scientists and inventors. In 2011, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. The original prototype, the 8-pound toaster built from junk bin parts, is now on permanent display at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. The man whose invention Kodak buried twice ended up in the Smithsonian. The executives who told him not to tell anyone are not mentioned anywhere. Here is what I keep coming back to with this story. Most corporate failure stories are about companies that didn't see change coming. They were caught off guard, the market moved, and they couldn't keep up. We shake our heads and move on. Kodak is not that story. Kodak saw the change coming in 1975. They saw it again in 1989. Both times they understood exactly what they were looking at. Both times they made a deliberate choice to walk away from it. Steve Sasson spent 35 years at a company that buried his work not once, but twice. He didn't quit. He didn't go public. He kept building, inside the same institution that kept choosing to look away from what he built. 145,000 people eventually lost their jobs because of decisions made in conference rooms that those 145,000 people never knew about. The executives who made those decisions are not named in any of this. They retired. They moved on. Nobody remembers them. Sasson is in the Smithsonian. Chemistry companies don't survive in a digital world. The only question was whether Kodak would be the company to make chemistry obsolete, or whether they would wait for someone else to do it to them. They waited, and someone else did. This is what Untold Inc. is here for. The decisions made behind closed doors by people who knew exactly what they were doing and the cost that everyone else paid for them. If there's a company you think deserves the same investigation, put it in the comments. We read everyone. If you're new here, subscribe. We do this every week. New story, new investigation, new company that thought nobody was paying attention. They were wrong.